Every year, as Christmas approached, my heart sank instead of soaring. While everyone around me seemed filled with joy, all I could feel was a heavy sadness creeping in. The reason for this sadness was a deep, unhealed wound, a memory that never seemed to fade. Just 2 days before Christmas, my parents died in a tragic car accident. It was a moment frozen in time 15 years ago, but it felt like it had happened yesterday. That accident took away everything I loved. My parents were my world, and with their sudden death, I was left alone, adrift in a sea of grief and loss. Since that day, I had no choice but to live with my uncle and aunt. They were kind enough to take me in, but it was clear that I was nothing more than a burden to them, something they had to tolerate because of family obligation. My uncle and aunt were not kind or compassionate. They were selfish, greedy, and cold-hearted. Their home, which was supposed to be a sanctuary for me, felt more like a cage. They made it clear every day that I was unwanted, unloved, and unimportant. Their children were their focus, their pride, and I was merely a servant, a means to help around the house. They treated me as if I were invisible, or worse, a nuisance. From the moment I moved into their house, I knew I was not part of their family. There was no love, no care. There was only indifference and cruelty. My aunt, in particular, seemed to take joy in making me feel small and worthless. She would belittle me in front of her children, using harsh words to degrade me. It was clear she wanted me to understand that I was nothing compared to her own children. I wasn't even allowed to be a child in her eyes. I was just a servant, someone who existed to do the household chores. Every morning I would wake up early and begin my day by cleaning, cooking, washing clothes, anything and everything to keep the house running. I never had a moment for myself. While the rest of the family enjoyed their breakfast, I was scrubbing floors or washing dishes. They would offer me 2 meals a day, but even those were given grudgingly. It was as though they were doing me a favor, as if I should be grateful for the bare minimum of food and shelter. But no matter how hard I worked, it was never enough for them. If I missed a spot while cleaning, or if something didn't meet their standards, my aunt would lash out at me. She would yell, scold me with harsh words, and sometimes, when her anger flared, she would hit me. I never understood why she hated me so much. What had I done to deserve this? I was just a child trying to survive in a world that had already taken so much from me. The worst moment came one day when my aunt's temper reached its peak. I had been sitting in my room looking at a photograph of my parents. It was the only thing I had left of them, an old picture of the 3 of us, smiling and happy. It was the last memory I held on to, the only thing that connected me to them. Whenever I felt overwhelmed by the grief and loneliness, I would take the photo out and hold it close to my chest. It gave me comfort, even if just for a moment. But one day, when my aunt was in a particularly bad mood, she found the photo. She didn't say anything at first. She just walked over to my bedside, picked up the picture frame, and without a word of warning, she tore it in half. The photo that had once been the only link to my parents was destroyed in front of my eyes. She didn't care. She didn't even apologize. She just threw the torn pieces in the trash and walked away, leaving me there, stunned and heartbroken. That photograph was all I had left of my parents, the only thing that kept their memory alive. And now, in an instant, it was gone. My aunt had taken it from me, ripped it apart like it meant nothing. It was as if she had taken my last connection to the people who had once loved me and tossed it aside like it was garbage. The pain I felt in that moment was deeper than anything I had ever experienced. It wasn't just the loss of a photograph. It was the loss of my parents all over again. I sat there for hours crying, unable to understand why this was happening to me. Why did they treat me like this? Why couldn't I have a family that loved me? Why was I condemned to a life of misery with no hope of love or care? My aunt's cruelty didn't stop with the photo. Every day I was reminded of my place in this house. I was a servant. I was a burden. I was not a member of the family. It didn't matter how hard I tried to fit in, to be kind, to be helpful. I would never be good enough. They never saw me as a person. They only saw me as someone to take advantage of, someone to do their work while they lived their lives. Christmas, in particular, was the hardest time of all. The holidays were meant to be a time of joy, of togetherness, of love. But for me, it was a reminder of everything I had lost. While other families celebrated, laughing, exchanging gifts, and enjoying each other's company, I was stuck in a house where I was invisible. My uncle and aunt spoiled their own children with gifts and attention, while I was left to do all the work behind the scenes. I didn't even have the courage to ask for something small for myself. I knew it would be a waste of time. They would never give me anything. I would watch from the sidelines as my cousins laughed and played with their new toys, and it would hurt deep down. It wasn't just about the gifts, it was about the love, the attention, the care that I was so desperately longing for. But instead I was ignored, overlooked, and left to suffer in silence. Sometimes, when the pain became unbearable, I would sneak away to a quiet corner of the house and let my tears fall. I would think about what Christmas used to mean before the accident, how my parents had always made it special for me. They had been my Santa Claus, always surprising me with gifts, laughter, and love. But now, those memories seemed like a distant dream, something I could never return to. I often found myself wishing for a miracle. Maybe, just maybe, someone would come and rescue me from this nightmare. Maybe there was someone out there who would see me, who would care about me, who would love me. I dreamed of a different life, a life filled with love, happiness, and the warmth of a real family. But for now, all I had was this cold, empty house filled with memories of what I had lost and the cruelty of those who were supposed to care for me. I had to endure. I had no other choice. But deep inside, a small spark of hope still remained. Maybe one day my life would change. Maybe, just maybe, Christmas would mean something different again. Maybe there would be a time when I didn't feel alone. But for now, I would continue to serve, continue to live in the shadows, and continue to dream of a better future. I had always been a fan of movies, especially the ones where the girl who had suffered so much in life suddenly found her happy ending. The kind of movies where the mistreated poor girl was swept off her feet by a handsome prince, and her life changed forever. I used to watch those films and dream of being the heroine, the girl who would have her own fairy tale ending. I wanted to believe that somehow, someday my life would change, that a hero would come and save me from this never-ending sorrow. I would close my eyes and imagine myself as Cinderella, waiting for my prince to appear, just as it happened in the movies. It was December now, and winter had begun to make its presence known. The chilly winds swept through the streets, and snowflakes started to fall gently from the sky. Christmas was just around the corner, but instead of feeling excited, I felt an odd emptiness inside me. As the snow piled up outside, my heart longed for warmth. I longed for someone who could share the holidays with me, someone who would make me feel special. I found myself wishing that I could have a boyfriend, just like the girls I saw in movies. A boy who would give me gifts, take me out on dates, and enjoy the holiday season with me. I dreamed of walking hand in hand through the snow, feeling loved and cherished just for once. But reality, as always, was far from the fairy tales I envisioned. My life was filled with pain and loneliness, and no amount of wishing could change that. Instead of a prince, I had an aunt who treated me like an outsider in her own house. Her children were her world, while I was just a shadow, a mere servant. My existence revolved around cleaning, cooking, and being overlooked. The world outside seemed to be filled with joy, but I felt locked in a cage of sorrow and neglect. One afternoon, as I was sweeping the floor in the living room, my thoughts drifted back to the dream I had, a dream of finding love and warmth during Christmas. It was then that Lucy, my aunt's daughter, walked in. Lucy was only 2 years younger than me, but she acted as though she were much older, often treating me as if I were beneath her. At 16, she was already popular, confident, and beautiful, the kind of girl who seemed to have everything going for her. She walked into the room with a proud, almost smug expression on her face, clearly excited about something. She came over to me, her voice dripping with arrogance, and held up her hand. A shiny diamond ring sparkled on her finger, and she grinned as she looked at me, her tone filled with superiority. "Look what I got," she said, showing off the ring as if it were a trophy. "My boyfriend gave this to me. Isn't it beautiful?" I stared at the ring, not out of envy, but because it was such a stark reminder of everything I didn't have. Lucy didn't even wait for me to say anything before continuing, her voice filled with excitement. "And this Christmas, he's going to propose to me, right under the Christmas tree. He's going to be my Santa Claus," she said, giggling at her own words, clearly basking in the attention. I forced a smile, trying to seem happy for her. But inside, my heart ached. I couldn't help but feel the deep loneliness inside me. Here she was, with everything I had always dreamed of, love, affection, and the promise of a beautiful future, while I had nothing. But I didn't say anything. I couldn't. She would never understand. I congratulated her, wishing her well, even though the words felt hollow in my mouth. I didn't mean it, not really. I just wanted to escape the painful reality of my own life, even if just for a moment. Lucy, of course, wasn't done. She tilted her head, her eyes gleaming with that same smug arrogance. "You know, Jessica," she said, her voice dripping with mockery, "you don't need a boyfriend to enjoy Christmas. You don't even need gifts. What you're good at is sweeping the floors and cleaning up after all of us. Maybe that's all your life will ever be. A servant, cleaning up after everyone. No boy will ever want someone like you. Who would want to date an orphan like you anyway? You're just here to do all the dirty work." I felt my cheeks burn with embarrassment. The tears that threatened to spill from my eyes were held back, but they were sharp like needles, piercing deep into my heart. I knew that what Lucy said wasn't true. Deep down, I knew I was more than just the chores I was forced to do. But hearing those words from her, the girl who had everything I could never have, hurt more than anything. I bit my lip, trying to hold back the sobs that were rising in my chest. It was true that I had no family left. It was true that I was living with people who treated me like nothing more than a servant. But that didn't mean I didn't have dreams of something better, something more. I dreamed of love, of kindness, of a life where I was not ignored, where I didn't have to fight for every scrap of affection. I dreamed of someone who would see me, who would look beyond my circumstances and care about me for who I was. Lucy's words stung, but I didn't let her see my pain. Instead, I forced a smile and nodded, even though inside I felt as though my heart was breaking into 1,000 pieces. "I'm happy for you, Lucy," I said, trying to sound sincere. She rolled her eyes, clearly not caring whether I was happy for her or not. With a dismissive flick of her wrist, she walked out of the room, still wearing that proud, victorious look on her face. I stood there, holding the broom, the tears blurring my vision. I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell her how wrong she was. I wanted to tell her how I had dreamed of finding someone who would care for me, someone who would love me the way her boyfriend loved her. But I didn't. I couldn't. There was no point. I had learned long ago that no one cared about me, not really. They saw me as an outsider, a burden, someone to be used and discarded. But I couldn't help dreaming. Even if it seemed impossible, I dreamed of my own happy ending. I dreamed of a life where I wasn't invisible, where I was more than just the girl who cleaned the house and cooked meals. I wanted to believe, just for a moment, that my life could be like the fairy tales I had watched as a child. And though I knew that those dreams were far from reality, I held on to them. Maybe one day something would change. Maybe one day a prince, my prince, would come and rescue me from this nightmare. But until then, I would continue to sweep the floors, clean the dishes, and wait. Wait for a miracle. It was one of those bitterly cold December evenings when the wind howled through the streets, carrying with it the weight of winter's grip. Outside the window, snowflakes drifted down, painting the world in a blanket of white. The soft glow of Christmas lights twinkled from the houses, creating an atmosphere of warmth and festivity that seemed so far removed from my own reality. I stood by the kitchen window, my hands absently wiping the dishes as I watched the snowflakes dance in the cold night. For a moment, I let my mind wander. What would it be like to be out there, in the snow, free from the chains of this house? A strange yearning gripped my heart. It was Christmas Eve, and the world outside seemed so alive, so full of possibilities. The air inside felt stifling, and I longed for a breath of fresh, cold air. I decided to sneak out for a short walk. I wasn't allowed to go outside, not for anything, but tonight felt different. Something told me I had to leave the suffocating walls of the house behind, just for a while. I quickly changed into clean, warm clothes, nothing too fancy, just simple and practical, before slipping quietly out of the back door. The cold immediately hit my skin like a shock, but there was a strange sense of freedom in it. As I walked down the quiet street, I could feel the soft crunch of snow under my boots, the world around me bathed in the soft glow of streetlights and the twinkling Christmas decorations on houses. The air smelled crisp and pure, and for the first time in a long while, I felt alive. I could see my breath in the air, and the snowflakes fluttering down around me seemed to cleanse my soul in a way. It was peaceful, almost magical. But then, as I walked further into the snow-covered street, I lost my balance. The ground beneath me was slippery, and before I knew it, my foot slid out from under me. My heart raced as I braced for the impact of the fall, but instead I felt a pair of strong hands catch me just in time. I opened my eyes in surprise. A handsome young man stood before me, holding me firmly by the arms, his worried gaze focused on my face. My heart skipped a beat as I looked up at him, but I couldn't help but notice how his eyes seemed to twinkle in the dim light of the street. His presence felt comforting, and for a fleeting moment I forgot about everything. The harsh treatment at home, the loneliness, the endless chores. "I've got you," he said, his voice deep and reassuring. I blinked, still in a daze, as I tried to regain my composure. "Thank you," I stammered, feeling a warmth spread across my cheeks. He smiled, and there was something about his smile that made my heart flutter. "I should be the one thanking you," he replied, laughing softly. After all, I was just in the right place at the right time. We both stood there for a moment, taking in the awkwardness of the situation. I pulled away slightly, feeling embarrassed, though there was something in the air that felt different from any other encounter I had experienced in a long time. "What's your name?" he asked, and his voice was warm, as though we had known each other for years. "Jessica," I said softly, feeling an odd sense of relief as I spoke. "What about you?" "Freddie," he replied, grinning. "Nice to meet you, Jessica." I nodded, trying to keep my composure, but my heart was racing. The sound of the snow crunching beneath our feet filled the silence as we began walking together down the street. It was a strange moment, almost surreal. I was walking with someone, a stranger, on Christmas Eve, and yet it felt so right. We started talking, and it didn't take long for me to realize that Freddie wasn't just another person passing by. He was different. He was kind, funny, and above all, real. As we walked, I felt a sense of comfort that I hadn't known in years. We talked about everything, the weather, our lives, our hopes, and our dreams. I shared with him my life, how my parents had passed away in an accident 15 years ago, and how I had been forced to live with my uncle and aunt. How Christmas had never felt the same since then. Freddie listened intently, his eyes warm and understanding. "You've been through a lot, haven't you?" he said softly. "But you're strong, Jessica. I can tell." His words gave me a small sense of hope, as though, for the first time in a long while, someone saw me for who I really was. It wasn't just the girl who was constantly cleaning, the orphan who had no family, or the servant in her own home. I was someone worthy of kindness, of attention, of a future that didn't involve this endless cycle of abuse and neglect. But as all good things tend to go, our peaceful moment was interrupted. As we walked hand in hand down the street, I saw my aunt from a distance. Her eyes narrowed when she saw us together. I froze in place, my heart sinking. I wanted to run, but it was too late. She had seen us. My aunt didn't hesitate. Her face contorted into a sneer as she marched toward us. "Jessica," she called, her voice sharp and cold, sending a chill down my spine. Freddie immediately dropped my hand, clearly taken aback by the sudden confrontation. I stepped back instinctively, not knowing how to respond. "Who is this?" my aunt demanded, her voice thick with accusation. "What are you doing out here with a boy in the middle of the night? Don't you know how dangerous it is?" I opened my mouth to explain, but the words stuck in my throat. Freddie looked at me with confusion, but I just shook my head, silently pleading for him to leave. "Go," I whispered to him. "It's okay. Just go." Freddie hesitated, but before he could say anything, my aunt snapped, "Get away from her! Do you think you can just walk around with some boy and ruin her reputation? Get back inside this instant." With a last lingering glance, Freddie turned and left, disappearing into the night. I stood there, watching him go, my heart aching as if I had just lost something precious. But I didn't have time to dwell on it. My aunt's fury was swift and unrelenting. She grabbed my arm tightly, dragging me back toward the house with a strength I hadn't known she possessed. "Do you think you can just leave and behave like a tramp?" she yelled, her face twisted in anger. "You're not allowed to have a life outside of this house. You belong here. This is where you stay. You think you can just run around with any boy. I won't have it." The bitterness in her voice cut through me like a blade. I wanted to protest, to scream, to explain that Freddie wasn't just any boy, but the words wouldn't come. I was too scared, too trapped in her power. My aunt's grip tightened around my arm as she dragged me up the stairs, her fury growing with each step. When we reached the door, she shoved me roughly inside, slamming the door behind us with a force that made the walls shake. "You think you can just leave and do whatever you want?" she spat, her eyes burning with anger. "You have no right to go outside. You're an orphan, Jessica, and you'll never be anything more than that. You'll stay here and you'll do as I say. No one is going to rescue you." Tears blurred my vision, but I refused to let them fall. I had no energy left to cry. My body ached, my head throbbed, and I was too tired to argue. All I wanted was for the world to stop spinning, for the pain to stop. But it didn't stop. Without warning, she slapped me hard across the face. The force of it sent me stumbling, and I fell to the floor, my head spinning. "You will never step outside this house again," she growled, her face inches from mine. "You will stay inside where you belong. You will never see that boy again, and you will never embarrass me like this." My mind went blank. I was overwhelmed with a numbness that felt both suffocating and freeing at the same time. The reality of my situation hit me like a tidal wave. I was truly alone. There was no one to save me from the prison of my aunt's control. "Now get to your room," she hissed, "and don't you dare leave it until I say so. Understand?" I nodded weakly, my body too tired to argue, too defeated to resist. I stumbled to my room, my heart heavy with grief. The cold from outside seemed like a distant memory now, replaced by the suffocating heat of my aunt's anger. I lay on my bed, my body shaking with fever, but all I could think of was Freddie. I wished I could go back and change everything, wished that I could have stayed in the warmth of his presence, away from this nightmare. But I knew that wasn't possible. And so I lay there in the darkness, tears quietly falling, as the storm outside raged on. As Christmas drew closer, an overwhelming wave of sadness enveloped me. It wasn't just the cold or the inevitable festive cheer that seemed to mock me. It was something deeper. The truth was, every Christmas, I was reminded of a loss so profound that it had shaped my entire existence. 15 years ago, 2 days before Christmas, my parents were taken from me in a car accident. The world shifted beneath me that night, and with it, my sense of joy, hope, and belonging. I didn't just lose my parents that night. I lost everything that had ever made me feel truly loved. In the years since their death, I had struggled to find any semblance of peace. Christmas, once a time of magic and togetherness, became a painful reminder of everything I had lost. Each year, as the holiday season approached, the weight of their absence pressed harder against my chest, suffocating me with its heaviness. Now living with my aunt and uncle, I saw firsthand the love they gave to their own children. It was the kind of love I had once known, but it was no longer for me. They were kind to their daughters, doting on them with presence, attention, and care. But for me, there was only a cold, distant formality. I was their responsibility, not their family. They would often remind me of that in their own subtle and not-so-subtle ways. I wasn't one of them, I was the orphan they reluctantly took in. Every Christmas, I felt it more keenly, the divide between me and them. I watched them laugh and share moments of joy, and it cut deeper than any physical wound. It was like an invisible barrier between me and the warmth of their family. It was the stark contrast between how they loved their own children and how they treated me that made the loneliness even more unbearable. I longed for my parents' love, their warmth, their presence. But all I had now were the memories of the last Christmas I spent with them, memories that were so vivid they almost felt like yesterday. I remembered my father, the way he would dress up as Santa Claus every Christmas Eve. It was a tradition, a silly yet wonderful ritual that filled our home with joy. He would fill my stocking with little gifts, and every year I believed, truly believed, in the magic of Santa Claus. It was a time when the world seemed full of endless possibilities, when love and laughter echoed through our house. My mother would sit beside the fireplace, smiling softly as she watched us, and for that brief time everything felt perfect. But that was a long time ago. That warmth was gone now, replaced by the cold reality of life without them. Christmas, once the happiest time of year, now felt like a cruel joke. It was a reminder of what I no longer had. I would see my aunt and uncle's daughters laughing together, sharing gifts and hugs, and I would think back to the days when I shared similar moments with my own parents. The absence of their love in my life felt like a gaping hole, one that nothing, no amount of presents or decorations or festive cheer, could ever fill. And sometimes, in my darkest moments, I would wish almost desperately that I had been in that car with them. If I had died that day too, at least I wouldn't be here, suffering through these endless years of heartache. I wouldn't have to witness the love others had, the kind of love I would never feel again. Maybe it was better that way. Maybe death would have been kinder than this endless, soul-crushing loneliness. But as soon as I thought it, a sharp pang of guilt would pierce through me. My parents wouldn't want me to feel this way. They would want me to live, to find happiness, even if they were no longer here to share it with me. They had given me everything they could, and they had loved me in a way that no one else ever would. I had to keep moving forward. They would want that for me. Yet the pain of losing them felt fresh, like it had just happened yesterday. Every year, the absence of their love during the holidays felt like a physical ache. And every year, I found myself wishing for just one more Christmas with them. One more chance to sit beside the tree, to hold my father's hand as he laughed at my excitement over the gifts, to see my mother's warm smile as she prepared our holiday feast. But those days were gone, and there was nothing I could do to bring them back. I would try to push the thoughts away, to focus on the present, to pretend that I was okay. But no matter how much I tried, the past always crept back into my mind, a haunting reminder of everything I had lost. I would watch my aunt and uncle with their daughters, and the more they loved them, the more I felt invisible, like I didn't belong, like I was just a guest in their home, not family. I was constantly reminded that I wasn't one of them. They might have given me shelter, but they never gave me their hearts. And so Christmas became a time of reflection, a time when I found myself drowning in the sea of what-ifs and maybes. What if my parents had survived the accident? What if we were still together as a family, celebrating Christmas like we used to? What if I hadn't been left to suffer in a house that never truly felt like mine? But those were just thoughts, fleeting and painful. The reality was that they were gone, and all I had left was this emptiness, a hollow space where love used to be. And no matter how hard I tried to fill it with something, anything, it never worked. Not even the Christmas lights or the food or the presents could make up for the loss I felt deep in my heart. Section 5. Uncle's Boss's Christmas Grand Party. 2 days before Christmas, the house was a cold shell of what it should have been. Despite everything, despite the harsh words, the cruel treatment, the constant reminder that she didn't belong, Jessica had decided she would try to make this Christmas different. She wanted to feel something good, something that could remind her of the way things used to be before her world came crashing down. So she spent hours decorating the house that wasn't truly hers, but one she had tried so hard to make feel like home. She hung sparkling lights on the walls, carefully placed ornaments on the tree, and arranged stockings by the fireplace. It wasn't much, but it was something. She could almost pretend that her parents were still alive, that this was a real Christmas, and that they were all together in this festive, warm space. But it was all just a hollow shell. The laughter was missing, the warmth of love was absent, and the only sound that echoed through the house was the silence that she had grown so accustomed to. As she stood back, admiring her work, she allowed herself a small, fleeting moment of happiness. The lights flickered and twinkled, casting soft glows around the room, and for just a second it felt like the world had softened. It wasn't the perfect Christmas, but it was hers, and that was all that mattered. But as usual, her moment of peace was short-lived. The door swung open, and her aunt, along with her 2 cousins, stormed into the house, their voices loud and full of excitement. They were coming back from their shopping trip, one that Jessica had not been invited to, and they had bags upon bags of new clothes and accessories. The kind of clothes Jessica could only dream of wearing. Jessica's heart sank as she watched them parade around, showing off their extravagant purchases. It was always the same, their lives filled with material wealth and luxury, while she was left behind, cleaning up after them, invisible to the world. Her cousins laughed and giggled as they fawned over their new outfits. "Look at this dress, isn't it gorgeous?" one of them exclaimed. "I'm going to look like a queen on Christmas Day." The excitement in their voices only amplified the emptiness Jessica felt. She wanted to be a part of it, wanted to be a part of their world just once, but there was no place for her in that world. Her aunt, who was watching Jessica's gaze linger on the clothes, sneered at her. "What's the matter, Jessica? Jealous?" she asked in a biting tone. "You'll never have what we have. You're just a maid in this house. Be grateful for what we give you." The words cut deep, deeper than any physical blow. Jessica felt the sting of shame, the sting of being reminded that she was less than. She wasn't even considered family. She was nothing more than an orphan they'd been forced to take in, an inconvenience, a burden. But then, just as the hurt began to settle in her chest, something unexpected happened. Her uncle walked in, a broad smile on his face, clearly excited about something. "I've got some great news," he said, his voice full of enthusiasm. "My boss is throwing a grand Christmas party on Christmas night, and he's invited the whole family. We're all going." At that moment, Jessica's heart skipped a beat. The idea of being invited to a grand party, of being included in something that felt special, made her stomach flutter with excitement. Christmas had always been about family, and maybe, just maybe, this party could be the kind of Christmas miracle she had been hoping for all these years. Her cousins squealed with delight, already planning what they would wear and who they would talk to at the party. Jessica, too, wanted to join in. She had to. She had never been to anything like this before. This could be her chance to be seen, to be treated like a person, not just the servant in the house. She had to ask. "Uncle, can I go too?" she asked, her voice laced with hope. "I'd love to come to the party." Her heart raced as she waited for his response, desperate for something good to happen. She imagined herself dressed up, standing in the glow of Christmas lights, surrounded by people who saw her as more than just an outsider. For the first time in years, she could almost taste the joy she had longed for. But then her aunt's laughter filled the room, cold and mocking. "You?" she scoffed, her eyes narrowing with disdain. "You want to go to a high-class party? Do you really think anyone would want to have you there? You'll never be part of our world, Jessica. You belong here, cleaning and serving, nothing more." The words were like daggers to Jessica's heart. Her aunt's cruel tone sent waves of humiliation crashing over her. She wanted to argue, to plead, to scream at the injustice of it all, but she knew it was pointless. Her aunt was right. Jessica didn't belong in that world. No matter how hard she tried, no matter how much she wished for something better, she would always be on the outside looking in. Her uncle, who had been standing silently by, finally spoke up, his voice cold and dismissive. "Your aunt's right," he said, glancing at Jessica with no trace of affection. "You stay here. We don't need you making a fool of yourself at a fancy party. Just stay home, clean up after us, and don't make any trouble." The words stung more than she had ever expected. She stood there, frozen, as the weight of their rejection settled heavily on her shoulders. She had hoped for so much, just a small chance to be part of something. But once again, her dreams were shattered. Her heart ached, and all she wanted was to escape, to run far away and never look back. Her cousins, oblivious to the pain they had caused, exchanged amused glances. "It's for the best, right?" one of them said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "After all, what would a maid like you do at a party like that?" Jessica's tears threatened to spill, but she forced them back. She had no choice but to endure this. They were right. She wasn't a part of their world, and she never would be. As her aunt and uncle left the room to prepare for the party, Jessica stood alone, feeling more alone than she had ever felt in her entire life. The house was still, the Christmas lights dim in comparison to the weight of her sorrow. Her heart broke as she watched them prepare, her aunt fussing over her new dress and her uncle checking his tie, acting as if nothing was wrong. But it was wrong. Everything was wrong. They were leaving her behind, once again, to clean up the mess of their perfect little world. The party was a distant dream, a vision she would never get to experience. The lights, the laughter, the joy, it was all for someone else, not for her. As they left for the party, Jessica was left alone in the quiet house, surrounded by the decorations she had worked so hard on. She thought about her parents, how they used to fill the house with warmth and love during Christmas. She thought about how, despite everything, they always made her feel like she was the most important person in the world. Now all she had were the memories of that love, a love that was gone, never to return. Christmas had always been a time for togetherness, for family. But for Jessica, it was just another reminder of how alone she truly was. Section 6. I was left alone at home. As everyone left for the grand Christmas party, I was left alone at home, once again abandoned to the silence that consumed the house. My heart sank as I heard the car engines fade away, leaving nothing but the deafening quiet. The emptiness of the house was overwhelming, and I couldn't escape the bitter realization that this would be yet another Christmas spent without love, without joy, and without the warmth of family. Sitting on the cold, hard floor, I allowed myself to feel everything I had been suppressing for so long: hurt, loneliness, anger. The tears began to fall, but I couldn't stop them. Why did this always have to be my reality? Why was I the one left behind while they went off to live their perfect lives? The more I thought about it, the more it hurt. I remembered the days when my parents were alive. Christmas had always been the best time of the year. My father used to dress up as Santa Claus and give me the most wonderful gifts. He would tell me stories, make me laugh, and tell me how much he loved me. My mother, too, would always make everything feel so special. But now there was only emptiness. I didn't even know how to begin to describe the crushing feeling that was overtaking me. I was no longer a part of anything. I was nothing more than a shadow in the house, a forgotten soul in a world that had moved on without me. And in that moment, I wanted to scream. Why couldn't I have been the one who died that day in the accident? Why couldn't I have been with them? At least then I wouldn't have to suffer through all of this pain and loneliness. I wiped my tears with the back of my hand, the sting of self-pity making my chest tighten. I closed my eyes, trying to calm myself, but the more I tried, the harder it became to breathe. I can't do this anymore. I can't keep pretending that everything's okay. Suddenly, my chest tightened, with an eerie sense of foreboding, like my body was sensing something that my mind hadn't caught on to yet. A shiver ran down my spine, and I froze. My sixth sense, something I had learned to trust after all these years of hardship, was telling me that something was wrong, something wasn't right in the house. What was it? The quiet was suffocating now, louder than the music from the party or the chatter that had filled the house just hours ago. I stood up quickly, the floor cold against my feet, as I hurried through the rooms, flicking on every light I could find. I needed to feel safe. I needed the brightness, the illusion of safety. But as I turned the corner toward my room, something inside me told me to stop. Something's here. My breath quickened, and my heart pounded in my chest. I felt a strong pull to the window. I don't know what it was, whether it was just a gut feeling or my nerves completely frayed, but I had to look outside. I slowly walked toward the window and, hesitating, pulled the curtains just enough to see out. The sight outside was picturesque. Snow gently falling, the streets glowing with Christmas lights, the trees heavy with their winter coats. The world was peaceful, serene even, but it didn't feel peaceful to me, not now. I squinted into the distance. Who was that? A shadow. I saw a person standing by the front door, half hidden by the snowstorm and the flickering Christmas lights. It was hard to make out any details, but the figure was there, too real to ignore. My heart dropped to my stomach. My breath caught in my throat. A loud crash broke my thoughts. It was coming from downstairs. My mind went into overdrive. I couldn't see the figure clearly, but I knew something wasn't right. I stepped back from the window, the blood draining from my face. I was paralyzed, my body rooted to the spot as I listened, wide-eyed. My pulse thudded in my ears. Another noise, a clattering sound, followed by the distinct sound of something heavy falling to the ground. My hands shook as I pressed my back against the wall, trying to steady myself. My stomach churned, and the fear gripped me. I shouldn't have been this scared. I should have known better. I had lived in this house for years, been through so much already. But this was different. I couldn't stay in my room. I had to find out what was happening. With shaky hands, I grabbed the door handle and cracked the door open just enough to listen. The house felt too quiet, too still, and I couldn't shake the feeling that someone or something was watching me. The house's old creaky floors groaned as I tiptoed down the hallway, staying as silent as possible. The lights in the house, though on, didn't seem to offer much comfort. The shadows felt too long, too dark. I was holding my breath, barely able to hear anything above the pounding in my chest. I slowly moved toward the stairs, my steps cautious, my body tense. When I reached the top of the stairs, I peeked over the railing, my eyes darting around the darkened hallway below. I felt my heart race faster as I slowly descended the stairs. Then, just as I reached the bottom, I heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps. Someone was walking around downstairs, moving toward the kitchen. I froze, my heart in my throat. Whoever it was, they were here, in my house. But how had they gotten in? All the doors were locked. My mind raced as I tried to make sense of the situation, but the fear kept clouding my thoughts. Was it one of the neighbors? Had someone come in to rob the house, or worse? Was it someone who knew me? I backed away slowly as the footsteps came closer. I wasn't sure what to do. Should I call the police? Should I confront them? I wanted to do something, anything, but my body refused to obey. My mind kept telling me that I had to stay hidden, that I couldn't risk being seen. I moved silently through the dark hall, praying that whoever was downstairs wouldn't hear me. The sound of their footsteps got closer, louder. I could feel them approaching my room where I was hiding. The door to my room creaked, and my breath hitched. I pressed myself against the wall, barely breathing, my heart pounding in my chest. I couldn't believe this was happening. Who was it? What did they want? But then, just as quickly as the footsteps had started, they stopped. The house fell silent once again. My mind was spinning. What was going on? Why had they stopped? Was it a trick? I stood motionless, not daring to make a sound. And then the door to my room slowly creaked open. I couldn't breathe. I was paralyzed with fear as the figure moved stealthily through the house. The man who had entered seemed like a thief, his movements deliberate, practiced, and smooth. He was tall and wore a dark jacket that blended perfectly with the shadows of the room. His face was mostly hidden, but I could see enough to make out the grim set of his jaw. The way he moved suggested experience. He knew exactly what he was doing, and he was doing it with precision. I was frozen, my heart hammering in my chest, my breath caught somewhere between my throat and my mouth. My entire body trembled as I stood there, hidden behind the wall. My mind screamed at me to do something, but my legs refused to move. I was completely alone in the house, no one else to help me. My phone was upstairs in my room, and there was no way to get to it. The only phone available was the landline in the lounge, and that seemed miles away. I need to do something. I can't just stand here and wait. The silence of the house was suffocating, broken only by the soft, rustling sounds of the thief as he rummaged through the rooms. It was Christmas night, but there was no peace or joy here, only fear. In that moment of panic, I forced myself to think. I had to get to the landline, and I had to do it without making a sound. I could already hear the thief moving toward the lounge. His steps were slow, calculated, and every time he shifted his weight, the floor creaked, a reminder of how vulnerable I was. I squeezed my eyes shut and took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. My thoughts raced. Should I call the police? Should I hide? But I knew I had no time. I had to act quickly, or I would be trapped in this nightmare. I moved as silently as possible, my feet barely touching the floor. My room was close to the stairs, and from there I could hear the faint sound of the thief moving about downstairs. I clenched my fists, my mind racing with all the ways this could go wrong. What if he heard me? What if he found me before I could make it to the phone? I made it to the top of the stairs, my heart in my throat. My body was shaking, but I pushed forward. I wasn't going to let him get the best of me. I crept down the hallway toward the lounge, my ears straining to hear any movement. The house was eerily quiet, except for the sounds of his footsteps. The moment I reached the door, I pressed my ear to it, listening for any signs that he was close. I could hear him moving about, but I couldn't tell if he was heading toward the lounge or somewhere else. My hand was trembling as I reached for the doorknob. Just one call. That's all I need to do. Just one call, and I can let someone know. But before I could open the door, I heard the faintest sound of the knob turning. My heart skipped a beat. Oh no, he's coming. In a flash, I dashed away from the door, retreating quickly back into the shadows of the hallway. I couldn't afford to get caught. My mind raced and my breath quickened as I found myself running back to my room. The thief was closer now. I could feel the tension mounting, the inevitability of the situation closing in around me like a vice. I reached my room in a panic, my hands desperately scrambling to find something to defend myself with. My eyes darted around the room, and there it was, an old, heavy stick. It wasn't much, but it was all I had, and I grabbed it tightly, holding it in front of me like a weapon. I have to protect myself. I can't just be a victim. I waited, my muscles coiled, ready to spring into action at the first sign of danger. My room was dark, but I could still make out the faint silhouette of the thief as he moved through the lounge below. Every sound he made seemed amplified, and I could hear his footsteps growing closer, slowly and deliberately. My grip tightened on the stick, and I held my breath. But just as I thought the thief was about to burst into my room, I heard a soft rustling noise from downstairs, followed by the unmistakable sound of a bag being filled. It was strange, almost methodical. The thief wasn't just taking things at random. He was choosing his items carefully, like someone who knew exactly what he wanted. I slowly eased myself into a more defensive stance, my feet barely touching the floor. He's not just here to rob the house. There's something more. Why is he taking only specific things? I felt a wave of nausea rise in my throat as I realized what he was after. He wasn't just after money or jewelry. He was going for the valuable antiques, the things that had been passed down through generations. My heart sank. This wasn't just a typical robbery. This was personal. I could hear him rummaging through the antique cabinet in the living room, carefully picking up small figurines, a delicate vase, and other fragile items, placing them one by one into his bag. How did he know about these items? How did he know what to look for? The thought made my stomach twist into knots. Then, as if to answer my unspoken question, I heard him mutter under his breath, "These will fetch a good price. This house has some valuable things." His voice was low and gravelly, almost as if he were talking to himself. How long had he been watching this house? The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. This wasn't random. This was planned. Suddenly, the thief turned and walked toward the hallway, making his way toward the stairs. My heart stopped. I couldn't breathe. He was coming up. He would find me in my room, and I would have no way to escape. I pressed myself into the corner of my room, hoping that the darkness would conceal me, that he wouldn't notice me. The stick was still clutched tightly in my hand, my knuckles white with tension. The sound of his footsteps grew louder as he ascended the stairs, each step echoing like a drumbeat in the silence. I felt like I was in a dream, a nightmare, where I couldn't move, couldn't scream, couldn't run. He was so close now, closer than I had ever imagined. And then, just as the footsteps reached my door, I heard the loudest crash. The thief had stumbled, knocking over something in the living room. His footsteps faltered, and the sound of glass shattering reached my ears. He cursed loudly, his voice filled with frustration. In that moment, I saw my chance. I bolted toward the door, my heart pounding in my ears, the stick gripped tightly in my hand. I couldn't let this moment slip away. I flung open the door, raced down the hall, and toward the kitchen. The thief, realizing what I was doing, began to chase after me. The tension between us was palpable. I had no plan, no escape route, but I had to keep running. If I stopped now, if I let him catch me, there would be no going back. This was my fight for survival. I went to the window, my heart pounding in my chest, hoping against hope that I would see someone out there, anyone who could help. But the street was eerily quiet, the falling snow blanketing everything in a thick white silence. The only sounds were the occasional rustling of the wind and the soft hum of distant traffic. But no one seemed to notice me. The streets were deserted. No one was coming. The realization hit me like a weight crashing into my chest. I was completely alone, and for the first time I felt it, that sharp, suffocating feeling of being utterly abandoned. The world had turned its back on me, leaving me to face this nightmare alone. The thief could be anywhere, and no one was here to help. I felt a sudden wave of panic wash over me. My mind raced with thoughts of escape, but my body refused to move. I had to think clearly. But all I could think of was the cold, dark night outside, the thief in the house, and the horrifying uncertainty of what might happen next. And then, as if fate were mocking my fear, I heard it. Footsteps. Faint at first, but unmistakable. The sound of someone moving, slowly, carefully, through the house. It was a sound that made my blood freeze. The thief was here. He was so close. My breath hitched in my throat as I instinctively darted under the bed. The darkness swallowed me, and I squeezed my eyes shut, trying to control the wild, frantic rhythm of my breathing. I had to be quiet. I had to remain hidden. If he found me, it would all be over. I could hear him now, moving from room to room, opening drawers, rifling through cabinets, his footsteps echoing through the house like a constant reminder of the danger I was in. He was methodical, searching for something, anything valuable. And I was just another thing to be discarded, another object to be taken and forgotten. My heart hammered in my chest, and the more I tried to silence it, the louder it seemed to beat. Every so often, I would hear a faint sound, a drawer opening, a chair scraping across the floor. And then the heavy silence would return. I couldn't keep track of time. It felt like hours, though it could have only been minutes. My eyes stung from the tears that blurred my vision. I didn't want to die like this, alone in the darkness, hidden under a bed like some forgotten child. And then, suddenly, a shift in the air. The unmistakable sound of heavy footsteps approaching my bed. I froze. My heart slammed against my ribs, threatening to burst from the pressure. He was right there, so close, I dared not move an inch. If I did, he would hear me. I could already feel his presence in the room, hear the slow, deliberate creak of the floorboards under his weight. He was going to find me. Just as I braced myself for what was to come, a noise broke the tension. Something fell, the sound echoing through the house, a loud crash. A vase, a lamp, something fragile breaking into pieces. I held my breath. The thief stopped moving. He didn't speak, but I could hear him tense, listen carefully to the sound. Then the voice of another man, a deep voice, cold and authoritative, called out from another room. "Sigma, over here, I found something." My heart skipped a beat. A second voice, a second person was here. The thief, or thieves, weren't alone. I couldn't understand what was happening. Was there someone else in the house with him? A partner? And what had he found? I wasn't sure whether I should be relieved that he was distracted or terrified that this could make things even worse. Would they find me? Would they realize I was hiding under the bed? The thief hesitated. For a moment, the house was silent again. Then I heard the footsteps move away from my bed toward the direction of the other voice. It wasn't much, but it was enough to give me a precious moment of relief. I stayed as still as I could, every muscle in my body locked in place, hardly daring to breathe. The tension seemed to stretch for eternity. I waited, barely able to move, my thoughts racing. Could I escape? Should I stay hidden and wait it out? And what was happening now? The voices were muffled, distant. The two men seemed to be talking, but I couldn't make out their words. Were they getting closer to me, or had they decided to leave the house? I had no way of knowing. Then, to my horror, I heard more footsteps. Slower now, deliberate. Someone was coming back toward the room. The thief was returning. My stomach clenched with dread. I couldn't stay under the bed any longer. I had to do something. I had to make a decision. But there was nothing I could do. I was trapped, alone. And then something even worse happened. I heard a door opening. What? The door to the kitchen. The thief was in the kitchen. My mind raced with options, but they were all futile. I had no escape. I had no way out. There were no windows in the room I could jump through. The only way out of this was to fight. I gripped the edge of the bed, my fingers digging into the wooden frame as I tried to stay calm. I needed to think. I needed to plan. But my thoughts were a blur of fear. And then I heard the sound I'd been dreading. The sound of the front door creaking open. The second thief had gone outside. Had he been trying to leave, or was he coming back for me? The first thief, hearing the door open, suddenly rushed back into the living room. The sound of hurried footsteps told me he was panicking, realizing something was wrong. I had no more time. I flung open the door, raced down the hall, and toward the kitchen. The thief, realizing what I was doing, began to chase after me. The tension between us was palpable. I had no plan, no escape route, but I had to keep running. If I stopped now, if I let him catch me, there would be no going back. This was my fight for survival. I rounded the corner into the kitchen, my breath coming in ragged gasps. My pulse thundered in my ears, drowning out all other sounds. The thief was gaining on me. I had no choice but to keep moving, to keep running. The door was locked. The windows were shut tight. I was trapped in the house with him. In a desperate burst of adrenaline, I grabbed the first thing I could find, a sharp kitchen knife. It was the only weapon I could get my hands on. But it felt like nothing more than a flimsy object in my hands. How could I fight off someone so much stronger than me? How could I win? But I had no choice. This was it. This was my last chance. I couldn't stop now. Section 9. The Christmas Tree's Miracle. The two thieves had already raided Uncle's room, carefully emptied the locker, and made off with all the cash, jewelry, and anything of value they could find. Their faces were filled with the kind of satisfaction that only comes from knowing they'd successfully stolen from a home. I could feel the tension rising as they made their way toward the exit, their bags heavy with their ill-gotten gains. But just before they left, something unusual happened. One of the thieves noticed the Christmas tree in the lounge. The tree, which I had so lovingly decorated, stood as a beacon of warmth and light in the otherwise cold house. The soft twinkling light seemed to mock the darkness that surrounded us, a symbol of hope in the midst of all the chaos. The thief, overcome by greed, made his way toward the tree. I watched from the corner of the room, my heart racing as he reached for one of the beautifully wrapped gifts sitting under the tree. It was an innocent-looking gift, but in the hands of a thief, it was just another opportunity to steal. But then, the unexpected happened. As soon as his fingers touched the gift, there was a loud crackle, a sharp, crackling sound like static electricity in the air. I froze, unable to believe what I was seeing. The lights on the Christmas tree flickered and then flashed with a violent surge of energy. The thief jerked backward as if struck by an invisible force. His body stiffened and he screamed out in agony. But it was too late. The electric current from the tree had already connected with him. The second thief, startled by his companion's scream, rushed forward to help, but as soon as his hands touched the first thief, the same surge of electricity shot through him as well. Both men were suddenly stuck to the tree, their bodies rigid, as though the very spirit of Christmas had taken control of them. The Christmas tree, with its bright, colorful lights, seemed to pulse with energy. The surge was like nothing I had ever seen. It wasn't just a normal electrical shock, it was as if the tree itself had come alive to protect me. I had never believed in miracles, let alone supernatural events, but as I watched the thieves helplessly writhe, stuck to the tree like flies in a web, I couldn't help but feel a strange sense of awe. The lights on the tree blinked on and off erratically, casting strange shadows across the room. I held my breath, unsure of what was happening. The house was filled with the eerie hum of the current flowing through the thieves' bodies, a sensation that seemed to make the whole place feel charged with an electric, almost magical energy. For a moment I stood still, paralyzed by fear and disbelief. The men were stuck, completely immobilized by the electric current coursing through them, and all I could do was watch. The Christmas tree, once a symbol of warmth and joy, had become a force of justice. It was as if something greater than myself had intervened, something beyond my understanding. But as the seconds ticked by, my fear began to turn into something else, opportunity. The thieves were incapacitated. They couldn't move, they couldn't escape. And this was my chance. I didn't waste any time. My heart racing, I dashed over to the thieves' bag, the one they had filled with the stolen cash and jewelry. My hands trembled as I grabbed the bag and made a quick dash for my room. It was now or never. If I didn't act, they might recover. I hid the bag under my bed and immediately reached for the phone. My hands were shaking as I dialed the number for the police. I spoke quickly, my voice strained with fear and relief. "Please hurry," I begged. "There are 2 men in my house. They tried to rob me, but they're stuck to the Christmas tree. I don't know how, but they can't move. Please send someone right away." I could hear the operator's disbelief on the other end. But I didn't have time for that. I knew what I had seen. I knew what had happened. The thieves were stuck, frozen, as if the tree itself had decided they didn't deserve to leave. The lights in the house flickered again, and I couldn't help but glance over at the Christmas tree. The thieves were still stuck there, unable to escape. I felt a strange sense of peace wash over me, but I didn't allow myself to relax. I knew that even though they couldn't move now, the police had to get here soon. They had to take control of the situation. I walked cautiously back to the lounge, keeping my distance from the thieves. They were twitching now, their bodies reacting to the electricity coursing through them, but they were still unable to break free. It felt almost surreal, as if time had stopped for a moment and I was caught in some kind of strange, inexplicable reality. I wanted to approach them, to make sure they weren't getting away with anything else, but I hesitated. There was a part of me that was still scared, still unsure of what might happen next. Would the electricity continue to shock them until they passed out? Or would something worse happen? I didn't know. Instead, I kept my distance, my eyes trained on the two thieves, who were now completely immobilized, their bodies frozen against the tree. The room was filled with the faint hum of the electrical current, a sound that seemed to reverberate through my body. I couldn't stop thinking about what had just happened. The Christmas tree, the lights, the current. Everything felt like a miracle. Could it be possible? Could a simple Christmas tree really have protected me in this way? Was it the magic of Christmas? Or was it something more? I couldn't say for sure, but in that moment it felt as though the universe, or whatever higher power existed, had stepped in to save me. My thoughts were interrupted by the distant sound of sirens. I felt a rush of relief flood over me. The police were coming. Help was on the way. I stood up straighter, trying to collect myself, even though my heart was still racing. The house was quiet now, save for the occasional crackle of the Christmas tree lights. The thieves were still stuck, their bodies twitching, but they were helpless. I glanced once more at the tree, wondering what strange force had caused all this. Could it be real? Was this some sort of Christmas miracle, or had it just been luck? I didn't have the answers. But as I heard the sirens drawing closer, I knew one thing for sure. I was safe. And for the first time in a long while, I believed that maybe, just maybe, things would finally start to get better. The thieves lay on the floor, tightly bound with ropes, their movements restricted. I had acted quickly, using the stick I had found earlier to secure them. I'd made sure they couldn't escape, and now they were trapped. The tension in the house had shifted. It was no longer filled with the fear of being robbed, but with an overwhelming sense of power. I had taken control of the situation. As I stepped back to catch my breath, I noticed that the neighbors had gathered outside. Hearing the commotion, some had seen the flashing lights and the flickering electricity from the Christmas tree, while others had heard my earlier calls for help. They came running, drawn by curiosity and concern. "Are you okay?" one of the neighbors asked, her eyes wide with shock. I nodded, still trembling from the adrenaline rush. "Yes," I said, trying to steady my voice. "The thieves, they're right here." People began to gather around me, forming a small crowd in the lounge. They marveled at what had happened, whispering among themselves, praising my quick thinking. "You're amazing! You really did it," one of them said, her voice full of admiration. Others chimed in, nodding in agreement. Some of them had already recognized the thieves from previous robberies in the area. I felt a surge of pride. It wasn't just my survival, it was justice. As the murmurs of praise continued, I saw the flashing lights of a police car in the distance. I had called the police earlier, but now I could hear the sirens, growing louder as they neared the house. My heart fluttered with relief. They were finally here. The police arrived in a flurry of activity. Officers rushed into the house, their expressions turning from confusion to realization as they saw the two thieves, still bound and struggling to break free. One officer walked over to me, his face a mixture of surprise and admiration. "You did a great job," he said, offering me a brief but appreciative smile. "We've been tracking these guys for months. They're part of a major robbery ring. There was a reward on their heads, hundreds of thousands of dollars." At those words, I felt a sense of disbelief. The thieves I had caught, the ones who had tried to rob me, were part of something much bigger. They were no small-time criminals. They were wanted, dangerous, and highly skilled. And now, because of what had happened, they were caught. The officer turned to the rest of the team, instructing them to take the thieves away. The thieves were practically dragged out of the house, still in a daze, but completely powerless. One of them shot me a look, his eyes full of resentment. But there was nothing he could do now. Justice had already been served. As the police processed the criminals, I felt a strange mix of emotions: relief, pride, and even a bit of disbelief. I had been in danger, my life had been threatened, but somehow I had managed to turn the tables. I had protected myself, and in doing so, I had protected others. But as the officers left, something unexpected happened. Uncle and Auntie walked in. They had returned from the party, their faces filled with curiosity, but their expressions quickly shifted to concern when they saw the police and the scene in front of them. "Jessica!" Auntie exclaimed, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "Are you okay? What happened? Did they hurt you?" I rolled my eyes, the act so obvious that I didn't bother answering. They were pretending to care now after everything that had happened. I saw right through them. "Don't worry, I'm fine," I said, keeping my voice steady, but my eyes narrowed. "I handled it." They exchanged quick, uneasy glances, but I could see it. Their initial shock faded, replaced by a glint of something else. Money. When the police officer mentioned the reward earlier, I could tell they were already thinking of how to get their hands on it. But I wasn't fooled. The officer, still nearby, overheard their conversation and looked at me with a knowing look. "You'll be getting the reward money, young lady," he said, his voice filled with respect. "It's a substantial amount, hundreds of thousands." My eyes widened for a moment, but then I realized the truth. I had already made my decision. I wasn't about to let Uncle and Auntie take that money. They had done nothing to help me. In fact, they had shown me nothing but cruelty and indifference. They hadn't lifted a finger when I was in danger. They had laughed at me, humiliated me, and treated me like a servant in their own home. They didn't deserve a penny. "No," I said firmly, "I'm not giving them a cent." Auntie's eyes flared up, her face turning red with anger. "What are you talking about?" she snapped. "You didn't do anything on your own. It was our house, our things. This reward belongs to us, too." I shook my head, my resolve growing stronger. "No, you didn't help me. You didn't even care when I needed you. You're not getting anything." The police officer, sensing the tension, stepped forward. "It's her decision," he said firmly. "This money goes to the one who brought these criminals to justice, and that's you." Auntie's face fell, her plans dashed. She turned to Uncle, but he too saw the writing on the wall. They had no claim to this. Without saying another word, I turned on my heel and walked out of the room, heading for the door. I wasn't staying here any longer. I had already spent years in their house, enduring their insults, their selfishness, their indifference, but no more. I packed up my things and left. I didn't take anything more than what was mine, the money from the reward. It wasn't about the money. It was about proving to myself that I could stand on my own, that I didn't need anyone else to define my worth. The next few months were a blur. I used the reward money to get a small apartment. I started working hard, earning my own way, and taking control of my life. I didn't have to rely on anyone. I had my own destiny now. As for Uncle and Auntie, I never saw them again. I cut all ties with them. They were nothing to me now, just a distant part of my past. They had always been driven by greed, and they had shown me their true faces. I wasn't going to waste my time on people who didn't care about me. In the end, I realized that this was my turning point. The Christmas tree, the thieves, the miracle that saved me. It had all been a sign. My fate had changed that night, and I had the power to shape it from here on out. And so I moved forward. No more looking back, no more being held back. The future was mine to make, and I was ready. Section 11. The Best Ever Christmas. The year that had begun with so much darkness and fear ended in a way that I never thought possible. It was the most beautiful, peaceful Christmas I had ever experienced, and it had nothing to do with presents, grand parties, or expensive decorations. It had everything to do with love, justice, and finally finding the peace I had been searching for. Freddie, the kind-hearted boy I had met on that fateful Christmas night, had become my rock. After everything I had been through, I never thought I would be able to trust anyone again. But Freddie was different. He didn't just love me for who I was in the moment. He loved me for the strength I had shown, for surviving against all odds, for the way I had carried myself through the darkest times of my life. And when I shared my past with him, every painful detail of my life with Uncle and Auntie, he didn't pity me or look down on me. He was angry. Angry at the way I had been treated, angry at the injustice that I had suffered for so long. And more than that, Freddie was determined to right the wrongs. He couldn't stand the thought of the people who had taken advantage of me getting away with it. One evening, after a quiet dinner, Freddie took my hand and said, "Jessica, I want to marry you. You've been through so much, and I can't imagine spending another day without you by my side." I was overwhelmed. It had been so long since anyone had shown me that kind of love, that genuine care. I had never felt more at peace than in that moment. And so, without hesitation, I said yes. We got married in a small, intimate ceremony, just the two of us, surrounded by a few close friends and family members who truly cared for me. Freddie promised me that he would always be by my side, that together we could make our lives better. He kept that promise, and more. Once we were married, Freddie didn't let go of the injustice I had suffered. He took it upon himself to fight for me, to make sure that Uncle and Auntie would be held accountable for their actions. He hired a lawyer and filed a lawsuit to get back the property and money they had unlawfully taken from me. It wasn't just about the money. It was about standing up for what was right. The case was long and difficult, but Freddie's determination and the strength we had as a team paid off. The judge ruled in my favor, and everything Uncle and Auntie had taken from me was returned. They were also sent to jail for their crimes. I had always known they were selfish, greedy people, but seeing them face justice brought me a sense of closure I hadn't even realized I needed. That Christmas was truly the best Christmas I had ever known. It wasn't the first Christmas after everything had happened, but it felt like a new beginning. Freddie and I spent the holiday together in our new home, the home I had built with my own hands, the home that was free of all the negativity and manipulation that had once been a part of my life. It was a home filled with love and laughter, a home where Christmas truly felt magical. Every Christmas Eve, Freddie and I now celebrate together. We decorate our tree with care, just the two of us, making it a tradition that brings us closer each year. We exchange gifts, not just material ones, but gifts of time, love, and gratitude. Freddie's love has been my greatest gift, and I'm forever grateful for him. As we sit by the tree each Christmas Eve, I can't help but think back to that first Christmas when I had no idea what would happen next. I was lost, afraid, and alone, but I had no idea that the challenges I faced would lead me to this, to a man who would change my life, to a future filled with hope, to a love so strong that no obstacle could ever break it. The Christmas that had begun with so much pain, with the fear of thieves and the cruelty of my relatives, ended up being the turning point of my life. And I realized that sometimes things have to fall apart before they can come together. Sometimes the worst experiences lead us to the best parts of our lives. And so here I am today, sitting beside my husband in a home that feels like a true home, filled with the love we've built together. My life is mine to live now, and I am not bound by my past. I have found my place, my purpose, and my happiness. Every Christmas, we celebrate not just the holiday, but the journey we've been on together, the ups and the downs, the struggles and the triumphs. We celebrate the fact that we found each other, that we created a life full of joy and love. We've come so far, and as we exchange gifts and laughter, I realize that this is what true Christmas magic is. Not the presents or the lights, but the love and gratitude we have for each other. No matter what happens in the future, I will always treasure the Christmas when everything changed. It was the beginning of the best chapter of my life, the Christmas that gave me back my strength, my freedom, and my future. And so, every year, Freddie and I look forward to Christmas, to the joy it brings, to the love we share, and to the miracles that have already happened in our lives. Because no matter how dark the road may seem, there's always a light at the end. And for me, that light was Freddie, the man who gave me a new beginning, and the love that will guide me through all the years ahead. As we wrap up this journey, I hope you found a piece of magic, a moment of hope, or even a spark of inspiration in the story of Jessica's Christmas transformation. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe for more heartfelt tales that remind us of the power of love, resilience, and the miracles that can happen when we least expect them. Feel free to share this story with your loved ones so they too can experience the warmth and hope that Christmas can bring. Let's spread the love and joy, because each of us deserves a little Christmas miracle in our lives. And in this season of love and reflection, I offer a simple Christmas prayer. May your heart be filled with peace, your home with warmth, and your life with love. May the miracles of Christmas find their way into your soul, bringing you hope and happiness. Wishing you a joyful Christmas and a blessed New Year. Thank you for being part of this journey. Merry Christmas.